I wasn't always like this. I used to have a normal face, a normal job, a normal voice. But after what happened in that house, I no longer talk to people, I don't live next to others, and I never, you hear, never enter rooms where the walls can convey even a little something. You don't know what it means to hear walls, do you? No squeaks, no sounds from the neighbors. I'm saying to hear as if someone is breathing from inside the concrete, as if someone is sticking their tongue between the wallpaper and the bricks and whispering in your ear, knowing everything about you. Your fears. Your guilt. Your past. You won't believe me. I understand it. I wouldn't believe it either if I were you. But do you want to know what happens when you hear the walls whispering? Good. Listen carefully. I moved in alone. It was a decision that I didn't think about for a long time. I just packed my things, closed the old apartment, and by evening I was driving in a truck with the seat folded back, with rubber tires crunching on the gravel driveway. I wanted to start from scratch. I had no job, my family hardly contacted me, and the girl I'd been dating for 5 years left me. She said I had become boring and neurotic. Maybe so. It was then that I began to notice something strange about myself. I overreacted to sounds, especially silence. When the room was quiet, I always got up, turned on the faucet, TV, or music. It seemed to me that there was something wrong with that silence. But it doesn't matter. The house I rented was rented for a pittance. It was described as spacious, old-fashioned, with thick brick walls and wooden floors. The owner was a typical old man with swollen fingers and a cigarette in his mouth. He sounded like a man with nothing to lose. Very. Too much, actually. But you need it, right? I nodded then. Of course, I wanted silence. But not like that. For the first week, everything was normal. I unpacked, put furniture on, slept on an air mattress, ate food from a can, and read old articles on the internet about house restoration. There were creaks, that's understandable. Old wood, thermal expansion, roof. But then other sounds began to appear. They were almost invisible. It's like someone is just moving. It's like nails touching the inside of a wall. I got up, listened, touched the plaster. Nothing. But one day I caught a phrase. It was muffled, as if from a basement, but very clear. You pretended to forget. But you remember, right? I pulled away from the wall and stared at her. It took me a moment to realize that it was my voice, only fainter, as if I'd said it 15 years ago. But I didn't tell anyone about it. Not out loud. From that moment on, I started writing everything down. I have a notebook. If not, it was. I threw it out later, when everything reached its peak. There were notes on what time I heard what words. Here's one of the pages. I've memorized it. 2213, the wall behind the refrigerator. Someone is calling my name. In my voice, but younger. He says, then why did you run away? 041, bedroom. The crying of a child. Very quiet. I live alone. No children. Did I start to lose my mind? Maybe. But then I decided to check what was behind the walls. I brought a hammer, tore out a board in the kitchen. There was a void behind the plaster, an old ventilation shaft, sealed on both sides. I thought maybe it was all about her. But it was empty. Then the reaction started. Not just sounds. The walls began to respond. I remember once I screamed, "Stop it!" And in response, I heard someone laugh softly, and this laughter came from all sides, from every surface. It didn't get stronger, on the contrary, it became closer, more intimate. I haven't slept in 3 nights. I was sitting in the bathroom with the shower on, headphones on, and a pillow on my head. The sounds didn't stop. Sometimes, at the seams between the tiles, it seemed to me that someone was breathing. Not the wind, not the pipe. It is the breathing, human, slightly rapid. Then I called a noise insulation specialist. He arrived, walked around with a microphone, with a device. And he told me, there is absolute silence here. Too much. You know, it's weird. In such old houses, sound should be heard. And here? It's like everything is being absorbed. It's like you have silencers in the walls. I asked if it was possible that someone had set up acoustic traps. He shrugged his shoulders. In theory, yes. But why? Why would anyone want this house to be so quiet that any sounds in it are your own? I did not know. But after his visit, the walls began to talk more often. Not just in a whisper. Sometimes they talked as if someone was standing next to me, but I couldn't see him. Sometimes it's as if someone is inside my skull and his voice is reflected from the inside of my brain. One day I woke up and found that on one of the walls, on the fogged glass of the window, it says, "Why were you silent?" I didn't write it. But I knew what it was about. I knew it. It had to do with something I did when I was 16 that it took me a moment to realize how far things had gone. This realization does not come abruptly, but gradually, as when you are sitting in a tub of warm water, and then suddenly you notice that the water is already icy, and you are trembling. That's how I realized that the house no longer just whispers, it changes me. It wasn't the walls, it wasn't the air, I was the one who started behaving differently. I stopped calling anyone. Not because I didn't want to, but because I felt that if I said even one word out loud, the walls would start talking more often. They seem to be waiting. They're waiting for me to say something I haven't said before. Something that I once decided to bury forever in myself. I began to walk slowly, almost noiselessly, even in my own kitchen. He didn't slam the door, he closed it with his hand, making sure that even the lock didn't click. Everything was happening in a kind of oppressive inner emptiness. I had a feeling that you can't make a sound in this house. Not out of fear, but out of some kind of perverted respect. It was as if the walls lived by their own rules, and I had to obey. Not because of magic, but because he was really starting to feel like a stranger. One day I went outside, just to keep from going crazy. I was standing, looking at the windows of the house, and it seemed to me that I saw my reflection, in each window at the same time. My movements. My head turned. Everything was exactly repeated in every glass. Except that I didn't move in one of the windows. I was just standing there. He looked at himself. I couldn't explain it. I came closer, squinted, but everything returned to normal. Just a trick of the light. Probably. From that day on, I began to notice one thing that was killing me. The house was listening. I realized this when, out of habit, I started reading aloud from an old newspaper, just to occupy my voice. I reread paragraph after paragraph. And when I said, according to the police, the body was found 3 weeks after the disappearance, the wall quietly exhaled. You weren't found then. I dropped the newspaper. And exhaled for the first time all day. It became clear that Dom wasn't just listening, he was comparing, analyzing, responding. Not in some mystical way. It's as if you started creating these answers yourself, as if you locked yourself in isolation for months and your brain started giving back everything you were trying to hide. I remember sitting in the pantry, staring at the concrete. I tried to talk to the walls. He asked them what they wanted. Why are they repeating my past? Why do they remember not just facts, but moments that I have never told anyone? They didn't respond with words. Just a whisper, a breath. The feeling that someone was here when I was doing something bad. When I was standing over the body of a guy who fell off a cliff. Not because I pushed him. No. I was just standing there. Watched. He didn't offer his hand. And then he left. He left as if nothing had happened. And he never told anyone. It was the very silence that I chose then. Now she's back. Only she started talking. It's the same thing every night. There is breathing in the bathroom. There's a voice in the bedroom, whispering, "Did you think it would just disappear?" There are quiet footsteps in the kitchen. Dust was pouring out of the sockets. There is a scratching sound in the living room, as if someone is running their nails along the wall from inside, but only once. And stops. Doesn't try to get out. It just lets you know he's there. I didn't sleep anymore. I rarely ate. My stomach was cramping, but I didn't want to leave the house. Paradoxically, the scarier it got, the harder it was to leave. It seemed to me that if I went out, I would take it with me. These sounds. These phrases. That whispering rhythm. He's in my head. And it won't stop at another address. Because now I knew it wasn't in the walls. It's in me. It's me. I am that voice. I am these whispers. On the 5th day without sleep, I heard something new. Something that wasn't there before. It was not a voice. And the sound is like someone moving papers. Dry, on the surface. I followed the sound, barely standing on my feet, and there was a piece of paper on the floor in the hallway that hadn't been there before. There was a printed text on it. I didn't recognize the font, but I knew for sure that it was written about me. About that night. About how I stood there, how I looked down, how I took a step back without saying anything and left, leaving the body below. Every detail. Even that I didn't want to leave, but I did. Because he was scared. Because he was a weakling. I wanted to burn the sheet, but as soon as I brought the lighter, the wall next to my shoulder groaned softly. I recoiled. No, it's not pain. It was a complaint. It was like she was saying, "Don't. Let everything stay." And I realized, this house is not a trap. This is the place where you face the truth. My own. He's not making anything up. He only repeats what you yourself once decided to bury. He doesn't punish. He makes you remember. You ask, what happens when you hear whispering walls? What's happening is that you can never pretend to be a good person anymore. You can live, eat, breathe, but inside you know, you've heard yourself. The way you really are. And now you're living with it. I didn't get out. But not because he couldn't. But because he didn't want to. For the first few weeks, I was still trying to fight. I wiped the mirror so that I wouldn't see my reflection, not the one you're looking at, but the one that's looking at you. I tried to behave like before. I brewed coffee, turned on the TV in the background, even opened the windows. He did everything to regain his normalcy. But the problem wasn't in the house. Not in the sounds. The thing is, everything I did was fake. I could feel it. Clearly, distinctly. Every action is like trying to wash your hands dirty with something that won't wash off. I started noticing things that didn't matter before. The plastic from the lid of the water bottle, which creaked like the very branch that I stepped on the slope that night. The metallic clatter of a spoon against a cup, which reminded him of hitting the back of his head on a rock. Even the tap water, when it flowed intermittently, sounded like his breathing, his last breaths. It wasn't a whisper, it was just a reminder. I'm not crazy. I've probably even become clearer. Because for the first time in a long time, I lived in complete silence, where every memory was real. No excuses. Without telling your friends how it happened. No one asked questions here. No one accused. Just walls that were just waiting for me to stop lying to myself. One day, I decided, I need to finish. Not life. Not a house. And a game of silence. I took the paper and started writing. Without headlines. Without structure. It's just the way it was. Everything that happened that night. How I saw him climb onto the ledge, how I didn't say anything, even though I knew it was a risk. How I stood when he stumbled. How could I grab him? But he didn't. Just because I felt inside, let him fall. Because then it's all over. Quarrels, debts, resentments. And I will no longer blame myself for getting tired of dragging it out. I've written everything. Every detail. Every disgusting, cowardly moment. I wrote about how I stood in the dark, listened to the silence, and walked home without looking back. I wasn't going to show it to anyone. I put the sheet in the same storage room where I first heard breathing. He just left it. I put a heavy lantern on top. And he went to sleep. From that night on, the walls no longer whispered. Not a single sound. But not because I got rid of them. No. Simply. They had nothing more to say. I said it all myself. Everything I was afraid of. Everything he buried. Everything he hid behind this house, behind his manners, over coffee, and talking about the weather. Now I am silence. I became this house. I didn't leave. I hadn't even thought about it. I wake up, walk around the rooms, sometimes I read that note. And sometimes I just sit in silence, listening, not to the walls, but to myself. To what I've become. Because if you've heard the walls whisper the truth to you, you can't go back to a life where you're a good person.